Have you ever wondered what kind of man it takes to burn the world for the ones he loves? Sometimes the monster we fear the most is the one staring back at us. The forest wasn't silent. It breathed. Beneath the canopy of ancient oaks, the wind whispered secrets to the leaves, carrying a faint cry, a sound so fragile it might have been mistaken for a bird. Marilla stopped mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. She tightened her grip on the basket of herbs she'd been gathering and listened. It came again. A cry. A child's cry. She glanced over her shoulder, the fading sun painting the horizon in hues of amber and blood. No one should have been out here. Not this deep into the woods. Not at dusk. Her pulse quickened. There were stories about these woods, whispers of things that didn't belong. Her feet rooted to the ground, caught between fear and a pull she couldn't explain. The cry came again, softer now, like a thread tugging at her heart. Against her better judgment, she moved. She found him near the roots of an ancient oak. The child was small, impossibly so, his tiny form wrapped in a fabric that shimmered like liquid silver in the fading light. He didn't cry when she knelt beside him. Instead, he looked up at her with wide, impossibly blue eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her. Marilla's breath hitched. What in the God's name? The fabric was smooth and cool to the touch, unlike any cloth she'd ever seen. It shifted under her fingers, catching the light as though it had a life of its own. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the child. When her fingers brushed his cheek, warmth bloomed beneath her touch, faint but steady, like the heartbeat of something alive. The boy didn't resist as she lifted him into her arms, but the weight of him was strange, too light, as though his bones were hollow. As she shifted his weight, her gaze fell to his small hand, where faint patterns glimmered across his skin. She blinked, and they were gone, the silver light swallowed by the shadows. "It's all right," she whispered, more to herself than the child. "It's all right. You're safe now." And then she heard it. A hum, low and steady, barely audible but unmistakably there, vibrating through her hands. Marilla froze, her heart pounding. She glanced around the clearing, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching her. But the woods were empty. Shaking off her unease, she clutched the boy closer and began the long walk back to the village. The forest seemed to close in around her as the light faded, the cries of distant birds giving way to the sound of her own hurried footsteps. The wind stirred the leaves in restless whispers, carrying a chill that made her skin prickle. When she reached the edge of the woods, she glanced down at the boy in her arms. His blue eyes were still fixed on her, unblinking, as if he were studying her. A shiver ran down her spine. "Who are you?" she murmured, but the boy didn't answer. He only stared. Shaking off her unease, she clutched the boy closer and began the long walk back to the village. The forest seemed to close in around her as the light faded, the cries of distant birds giving way to the sound of her own hurried footsteps. I was 10 years old when everything changed. The village was small, tucked away in a valley where the forest met the fields. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I spent my days helping Mother, fetching water from the creek, carrying bundles of wood, learning how to patch the roof of our little hut. She would hum to herself as she worked, her voice soft and soothing, like the lullabies she sang when I couldn't sleep. Mother always seemed to know what I needed, often before I did. When I'd scrape my knees on the rocks by the creek, she'd kneel beside me, brushing the dirt away with her calloused hands and pressing a cool poultice to the wound. "Strong as an oak, my little one," she'd say, her smile warm enough to melt away the sting. "But even oaks need tending." She never treated me like anything other than her own, not once. And I believed her, until the first time I noticed the differences. It was small things at first, The way the other children teased me about my eyes, too bright, too sharp, like a wolf's. Or the fact that I never seemed to get sick like the other kids, no matter how cold the winters were. Mother dismissed it with a laugh whenever I asked, "You're just special, Marxian. The gods must have kissed you on the forehead when you were born." She'd say it with such conviction that I believed her, though sometimes I'd catch her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A look that wasn't quite sadness, but something close to it. One afternoon, as we sat on the bank of the creek washing laundry, I worked up the courage to ask, "Mama, where did I come from?" Her hands stilled in the water for just a moment, her eyes fixed on the ripples. But then she smiled, turning to me. "From the stars," she said, brushing a strand of wet hair from my forehead. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Really?" I asked, wide-eyed. She laughed, a soft, melodic sound. "Really. And one day when you're grown, you'll see how bright you can shine." It didn't matter then whether her answer made sense. She was my mother, and I loved her. That was enough. It was a simple life, but it was ours. Mother taught me how to work the fields, how to tend the goats and mend a fence. She taught me how to fish, showing me how to weave a net and how to feel the line tug when the fish bit. "Patience, Marxian," she'd say, her voice calm. "Everything comes in its time." She taught me to read too, though books were scarce. She'd write letters on scraps of parchment, teaching me the sounds of each one until I could string them together into words. "Your mind is as important as your hands," she'd say, tapping the side of my head with a teasing grin. "You'll need both to make your way in the world." Sometimes, when the work was done, we'd sit by the fire and she'd tell me stories of great warriors and gods, of men who defied kings and beasts that roamed the forests. She'd weave the words together so vividly that I could almost see the flicker of swords and hear the roar of the creatures. "What about me?" I'd ask, leaning closer. "Am I like them?" Her smile would soften, and she'd place a hand on my cheek. "You're my son. That's more than enough." It happened on a warm summer evening. The sky was painted with streaks of red and gold as the sun dipped below the hills. I was in the fields, chasing the last of the goats back into the pen, when I heard it. The sound of hooves pounding against the earth, faint at first but growing louder. Shouts followed, carried on the wind like the distant rumble of a coming storm. I froze, my heart racing. The goats scattered, but I barely noticed. My ears caught the sound of Mama's voice, sharp and urgent, calling my name from the edge of the field. "Marxian, get inside now!" She was running toward me, her face pale with fear. Behind her, the first riders crested the hill, their figures silhouetted against the fading light. There were 5 of them, maybe 6, their horses kicking up dust as they charged toward the village. The setting sun glinted off the weapons they carried, blades and axes, sharp and deadly. I didn't think. I ran. The raiders descended on the village like wolves on a flock of sheep, the air filled with screams and the clash of steel, the smell of smoke and blood. Mama grabbed my hand and pulled me toward our hut, her grip like iron. Inside, she pushed me toward the crawl space beneath the floor. "Hide," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't make a sound. No matter what happens, you stay here. Do you understand?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Mama, what about you?" She cupped my face in her hands, her eyes soft despite the chaos around us. "I'll be fine, my love. Just stay hidden." She kissed my forehead and slid the wooden panel back into place, plunging me into darkness. I lay there, trembling, as the sounds of the raid grew closer. I heard the door splinter, the heavy boots of the raiders stomping through the hut. They spoke in voices rough and guttural, words I couldn't understand. And then I heard her. "Please, Mother said, "Take what you want, but leave us be." There was a pause, a silence so sharp it made my chest ache. Then a laugh, cruel and mocking. The sound of a struggle, the crash of something breaking. I bit down on my hand to keep from crying out, my body shaking with fear and rage. The last thing I heard before the world went quiet was her scream. When they pulled me from the crawl space, the light stung my eyes. I squinted up at the man who had found me, his face hard and scarred, his teeth bared in a sneer. He dragged me out into the open, where the village lay in ruins. Huts burned, their roofs collapsing in showers of sparks. Bodies littered the ground, some still, others moving weakly. I searched for her, my eyes darting wildly. But I couldn't see her. I couldn't find her. "Good find," another man said, clapping the scarred one on the back. "He'll fetch a good price." They tied my hands and threw me onto the back of a wagon with the other captives. I tried to fight, to struggle, but I was too small, too weak. The wagon creaked and lurched as it moved, carrying us away from the only home I'd ever known. I didn't cry. Not then. Not as the village disappeared behind me, the smoke rising like a funeral pyre into the evening sky. I bit down on my grief, swallowed it whole. Mama's voice echoed in my mind. Stay hidden. Stay safe. I had failed her. The days that followed blurred into one another. They fed us scraps, kept us bound, and spoke little. When we stopped at a market, I was pulled from the wagon and handed off to a man who inspected me like I was livestock. He nodded once, tossing a pouch of coins to the raiders, and led me away. The man was tall and broad, with a face like stone and eyes that held no kindness. He took me to a place I would come to know as the Ludus, the training ground for gladiators. "You'll fight," he said, his voice cold and final, "or you'll die." I was thrown into a cell with half a dozen other boys, all of them gaunt and hollow-eyed. No one spoke to me. No one even looked at me. That night, as I lay on the cold stone floor, I thought of her. I thought of the way she'd held me, her voice soft and warm. I thought of her last scream. And for the first time I let myself cry. The first thing you learn in the Ludus is how to bleed. Not how to fight. That comes later. They strip away the rest of you first. Your name, your pride, your past. Pain becomes your only teacher. They make you run until your legs give out, beat you until you can barely stand, then throw you into the dirt and tell you to do it all over again. I learned fast. I had to. The other ones were just as desperate, their eyes hollow but sharp, like feral animals backed into a corner. The trainers were worse. They didn't see us as boys. To them, we were weapons waiting to be forged, and they hammered us relentlessly until the softness in us was gone. I didn't know how long I'd been there before I first stepped into the sand. Time lost its meaning in that place. Days were counted in bruises and broken ribs, nights in the ache of hunger, and the muffled cries of boys who didn't make it. The arena was smaller than I expected, just a ring of sand surrounded by wooden bleachers, half filled with shouting men and women. My opponent was another trainee, a boy not much older than me, his face set in a grim mask. He didn't hesitate when the horn sounded. Neither did I. We weren't fighting for glory. We weren't fighting for survival. We were fighting because they told us to, and because we knew what happened to boys who didn't. He was quick, but I was quicker. He swung wide, and I ducked under his blade, feeling the whoosh of air as it passed over my head. My body moved on instinct, the hours of brutal training guiding my every step. I struck his leg, his arm, his ribs, until he crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. "Kill him!" the trainer barked. I froze. The boy was on his knees, clutching his side, blood trickling from his mouth. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear and something else, pleading maybe. I tightened my grip on the wooden sword, my hands slick with sweat. "Kill him or you both die," the trainer repeated, his voice cold and final. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed to stop, to drop the weapon, to run. But there was nowhere to run, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard her voice. Stay hidden. Stay safe. I brought the sword down. After that, the fights came easier. The hesitation was gone. I told myself I had no choice, that it was the only way to survive. But some nights when I lay on the cold stone floor of my cell, I would see their faces. The boys I had beaten. The boys I had killed. They haunted my dreams. Their eyes staring back at me, empty and accusing. But it wasn't all horror. There were moments of light, rare as they were. His name was Rufus. He was older, his beard speckled with grey, and his body bore the scars of 100 battles. He was a veteran gladiator, but he spoke to me like an equal, like a person. You're quick, he said one day, as we trained together. Quicker than anyone I've seen, but you think too much. I think perhaps it is what keeps me alive, I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. Rufus chuckled. Maybe so, but in the arena, thinking can get you killed. You need to trust your instincts. Over time, he became more than a mentor. He became a friend. He told me stories of his life before the Ludus. A wife he had loved. A son he'd lost. He didn't talk about them often, but when he did, his voice softened, and I saw the man beneath the scars. One evening, as we sat together by the fire after a day of grueling training, he said something I would never forget. It's not the strongest who survive, Rufus said one night as we sat by the fire, his voice low. It's the ones who know when to fight and when to wait. Keep your strength hidden until it matters, lad. That's how you live. He smiled then, a rare and fleeting thing. And remember, no matter what they tell you, you're still human. It's also easy to become a monster in this place, he said, staring into the flames. But there's good in you, Marxian. Real good. Please, hold on to that. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. But his words stayed with me, even as the months turned into years, even as the arena turned me into something I barely recognized. I lost count of how many battles I'd fought long ago. The days blurred into weeks, the weeks into years. Each arena felt the same. The roar of the crowd, the stench of sweat and blood, and the endless clanging of steel. But this fight was different. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air hung heavy, and the crowd's cheers echoed like thunder even through the stone walls of the Colosseum. We waited in the dim, suffocating space beneath the arena, the only sounds the muffled roar of the crowd and the distant clatter of weapons. 4 of us had been chosen for this fight, but I barely saw the other 2. My focus was on Rufus, my brother in arms, standing across from me, silent and steady as always. The weight of what was coming pressed down on us. Only one of us would leave that arena alive. The prize was freedom. The cost was everything. Rufus broke the silence first, stepping closer, his eyes steady. We knew this would happen. I shook my head. There has to be another way. There isn't, he said simply, his voice calm but firm. We've fought too hard to get here. If I'm going to die, I want it to be at your hand. I want to go out like a warrior, not with a blade in my back or torn apart by lions. My throat tightened, the words catching before they could escape. I can't do it. You can, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. His grip was strong, grounding me in a way I didn't deserve. And you will. Promise me, Marxian. Promise me you won't hesitate. I met his gaze, seeing no fear, no hesitation, only resolve. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was asking for honor. I promise, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He gave me a small, grim smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. Good. Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget. The arena stretched wide and open as we stepped into the sunlight, the crowd's deafening roar shaking the very stones beneath our feet. The four of us stood in a loose circle, the blood-stained sand beneath us a grim reminder of what was at stake. The first horn blew, low and haunting, and chaos erupted. A hulking man with a spiked mace charged toward me, his weapon swinging in deadly arcs. I sidestepped his first strike, the air hissing as the mace grazed past. My sword found its mark, plunging into his ribs. He fell with a groan, blood pooling beneath him. Another gladiator, a wiry man with a curved blade, darted in, his strikes fast and relentless. We clashed, the impact of our blades jarring my arms. He pressed forward, driving me back step by step. When my heel caught on a discarded shield, he lunged. I rolled aside, grabbing a fistful of sand and hurling it into his eyes. He stumbled, blinded, and I didn't hesitate. My blade pierced his chest, and he collapsed. The second horn sounded, louder and more ominous. The gates groaned open, and two lions stalked into the arena, their golden eyes scanning the battlefield. The crowd erupted into a frenzy, their cheers merging into one insatiable demand for death. Rufus and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. The lions were no longer a threat to each other. They were a threat to both of us. The first lion lunged at Rufus, its massive body slamming into him. He rolled with it, his blade slashing at its side, but the beast was relentless. I rushed in, driving my sword into its flank. It roared, thrashing wildly, but together we brought it down. The second lion charged at me, its claws raking the air. I dodged, the beast's roar shaking the ground beneath me. Rufus's spear flew past, striking its flank. I seized the moment, plunging my blade deep into its throat. The lion's blood sprayed hot against my skin as it fell lifeless to the sand. When the last lion collapsed and the dust began to settle, the crowd roared louder than ever. The fight wasn't over. The final horn blew. I turned to see Rufus standing across the arena, his spear steady, his face calm. "We knew this day would come," he said. "I won't fight you," I said, my voice shaking. "Yes, you will," he replied, stepping closer. "We made a promise." We circled each other, the blood-streaked sand grinding beneath our feet. The crowd's cheers faded into the background, their screams muted by the weight of the moment. Rufus moved first, his strikes deliberate and precise. I blocked, parried, countered, our blades flashing in the sunlight. It was brutal. It was beautiful. It was inevitable. My sword found its mark. Rufus fell to his knees, his spear slipping from his grasp. I stood over him, my chest heaving, my blade hovering above his heart. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Marxian," his voice was soft but steady. "Live free." Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Die well, my brother." And I plunged the sword into his chest. The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the Colosseum to its core. The trainer approached, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You've earned your freedom," he said. "You're no longer a slave." Freedom. I didn't feel free. All I felt was the weight of Rufus's last words, heavy as the blade still clutched in my hand. Freedom wasn't what I thought it would be. The crowd roared for me as I left the arena that day, their cheers echoing like a storm in my ears. But the noise faded as quickly as it came. By the time the gates closed behind me, there was only silence and the emptiness inside me. The gates of the Colosseum closed behind me, but they didn't let me go. The weight of chains lingered on my wrists, invisible but unrelenting. Freedom was just a word, a hollow thing that left me drifting, aimless and alone. I was given a sack of coins, a crude map, and a pat on the back. that was it. No guidance, no purpose, just the promise that I was no longer property. They didn't care where I went or what I did, and for the first time in my life, neither did I. But her face came to me that night as it always did. My mother, Marilla. I had buried her voice deep inside me during the years in the Ludus, locked it away with everything else I wanted to forget. But now it came rushing back, unbidden and relentless. I had to find her, or at least what was left of her. I came to what was little more than a cluster of huts surrounded by farmland. The people there stared at me with suspicion as I approached, their eyes lingering on the scars that crisscrossed my arms and face. I didn't blame them. I looked like a soldier, or worse, a man who lived by the blade. "I'm looking for someone," I said to an old man who stood by the well, his face weathered and his back bent. "A woman, silver gray hair, fair complexion. She would have lived near a forested valley." He squinted at me, scratching his chin. "Ain't many like that around here," he said. "But I've heard talk of a woman like that. Lives near the valley a few leagues west of here. Alone, I think." My chest tightened. "How long ago did you hear this?" The old man shrugged. "A few years, maybe more. Time blurs when you're old. She could still be there, could be gone." I thanked him and continued on, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Could be gone. It was a thought I couldn't shake, but I refused to let it stop me. She had to be there. She just had to. The closer I came to the valley, the quieter the world seemed to grow. The birds stopped singing, their silence stretching thin across the woods. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, its whispers falling still against the towering trees. I tightened my grip on the hilt of my sword, the unease growing like a shadow in my chest. When I reached the edge of the village, I knew something was wrong. The huts were dark, their doors hanging from broken hinges. The fields were overgrown, the paths choked with weeds. There were no people, no sounds, only the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I stepped cautiously into the clearing, my hand resting on the hilt of the short sword I carried. My heart pounded as I scanned the abandoned village, my eyes darting from one ruined structure to the next. And then I saw it. I stood there staring at the tree in the distance. Time didn't exist, only that swaying figure hanging from the gnarled branches. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat, but everything else felt muted. My breath caught. My legs wouldn't move. I wanted to look away, to stop, but I couldn't. Closer now. The breeze tugged at the figure's tattered dress, revealing pale, motionless hands bound at the wrist. My chest tightened as I forced one foot forward, then the other, until I stood just an arm's length away. Her silver-gray hair hung limp, darkened with blood. My fingers reached for it, trembling as I brushed it aside to see her face. It was her. Mother? No. The word fell from my lips, so faint I wasn't sure I'd spoken at all. My knees buckled, but I didn't hit the ground. I just stood there, frozen, locked in that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared. And then it hit me. A sound so deafening, so overwhelming that I staggered back. My ears felt like they would burst, but it wasn't pain. It was clarity. Every sound in 100 leagues crashed into me at once. Distant voices from towns I'd never seen, the creak of wagons rolling over dirt roads, the rush of rivers, the flap of birds' wings. Every whisper of the world roared in my skull. I gasped, my hands clutching at my head as my eyes burned. It wasn't just my ears. I could see everything. A bird landing on a branch miles away. A fox slipping through the underbrush far to the south. The veins running beneath the bark of the tree before me, pulsing faintly with life. No. My voice cracked, hoarse and broken. My knees gave out. and I collapsed to the ground. My hands clawed at the dirt, fists pounding the earth in a desperate attempt to stop the chaos inside me. The first blow sent a shudder through the ground. The second cracked it open. Each strike, the tremors grew stronger. The earth beneath me heaved, splitting apart in jagged fissures. Trees around me groaned and splintered, their trunks cleaving cleanly in two. The sound of destruction filled the air, a symphony of chaos I couldn't control. I felt myself slipping. The ground blurred beneath me, my fists moving as though they belonged to someone else. The ringing in my skull rose to a crescendo, drowning out the cacophony around me. And then, nothing. I woke to silence. The first thing I noticed was the air. It was still, heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. My body ached as I pushed myself upright, my hands sinking into soil that felt too loose, too broken. And then I saw it. The grove around me was unrecognizable. Trees lay scattered like broken matchsticks, their trunks cleaved cleanly in half. The ground was a jagged map of destruction, fissures and craters carved into the earth in every direction. I sat there, staring at the devastation. It was impossible, yet I remembered it all. The sound, the power, the chaos. It hadn't been a dream. It had been me. It dawned on me, chilling and absolute. My voice was barely a whisper. What am I? Later that day, I stood over the freshly turned earth, the shovel slipping from my grasp as I gazed at the unmarked grave. The village was silent now, the echoes of its destruction lingering in the air. 15 years had passed since I last saw her face, the woman who had found me as an infant and raised me as her own. I had been sold into slavery, fought my way to freedom in the gladiatorial arenas, all with the hope of returning to her. But I was too late. Bandits had come, leaving nothing but ashes and death. I knelt beside her resting place, my heart heavy with regret. "Forgive me, Mother," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I wasn't here." Tears blurred my vision as I bowed my head, the weight of my absence crushing my soul. As I gathered myself is when I felt it. A faint scent of blood in the air, Mother's blood unmistakably so. And I followed it. The scent was more than a smell. It was a map. I could feel the heat of their campfire before I saw its light, hear the faint rustle of their laughter even as the wind carried it away. Each step felt certain, inevitable, as if the forest itself whispered their location into my ears. The scent was stronger now, a metallic tang that clung to the air like a shadow. It guided me through the dense forest, each step drawing me closer. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The trail was unmistakable, leading straight to the clearing ahead where firelight flickered through the trees. They didn't know I was coming. 4 of them sat around the fire, their laughter breaking the quiet. Weapons lay scattered within arm's reach, but their ease betrayed their carelessness. They were confident, relaxed, predators who believed they had no prey to fear. I stepped into the clearing without a word. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. For a moment they didn't react, their expressions flickering between confusion and annoyance. The largest of them stood first, a bearded brute with scarred knuckles. His voice was rough, edged with derision. "Who the hell are you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let my eyes drift over them, lingering on their faces, their hands, the weapons they hadn't reached for yet. My gaze settled on the blood-stained scrap of cloth tied to the wiry man's belt, its edges frayed and dirty. My jaw tightened. "I'm nobody," I said finally, my voice calm. The wiry man snorted, leaning forward with a crooked grin. "Nobody, huh? You look like a lost little boy." I nodded, keeping my tone calm. "Yes, and I was wondering if you might help me find my way." The bearded man took a step closer, towering over me. You've got a death wish, boy. The wiry one's grin widened. Or maybe... His eyes flicked to the pouch at my side. He's got something there. I slowly reached into the pouch, retrieving a single gold coin, and tossed it at their feet. The firelight glinted off the metal as it landed in the dirt. "That's for a moment of your time," I said, my voice steady. "You'll get more if you answer my questions." They exchanged glances, the wiry man crouching to pick up the coin. He turned it over in his hands before meeting my gaze. "You've got our attention. Speak." I moved slowly to a nearby tree, placing my hand on its rough bark. "Have you been to a village west of here? A small one? Near a valley?" The bearded man frowned. "What's it to you?" "Everything," I said softly. My fingers curled, and with a single blow, I struck the tree. The trunk split cleanly, the top half crashing to the ground in a thunderous display. The bandits froze, their confidence cracking as they stared, wide-eyed, at the fallen tree. I dragged the severed trunk back to the fire and sat on it, folding my hands calmly. "Do you mind if I sit?" None of them spoke. "I've been traveling," I began, my voice conversational. "From town to town, looking for an old woman. Frail, silver-gray hair, probably in her 80s. She lived alone in a small village." Their unease grew as I continued, my tone measured. "I found the village. The houses were ransacked, some burned. In the center there was a tree. She was hanging from it like an animal. It took me a moment to realize it was her. When I pulled her blood-matted hair back and saw her face, I knew." I leaned forward, my gaze hard. She was my mother. I hadn't seen her in 15 years. The man shifted uncomfortably. The bearded one clenched his fists. They glanced at each other, their earlier bravado replaced by something far more fragile. "I buried her," I said, my voice dropping lower. And as I did, I wondered, what kind of creatures would do this to a helpless old woman? I gestured toward the wiry man's belt, where the blood-stained cloth swayed like an accusation. "You carried her blood with you. That's why I found you." Silence hung in the clearing, thick and suffocating. Their eyes darted to one another, searching for answers, for escape. "I can hear your hearts," I said softly, breaking the quiet. "I can hear the blood rushing through your veins, pounding like drums. It's the same fear she must have felt." The wiry man stumbled back, his hands trembling. What are you?" I tilted my head, studying him. "If you were in my position, what would you do to you?" The bearded man broke first, turning and sprinting into the trees. Another followed, crashing through the underbrush in blind panic. The wiry man dropped to his knees, his voice breaking into a sob. "Please," he begged. "Please, I'm sorry." I stood slowly, walking toward him with deliberate steps. He flinched as I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Did you show her mercy?" I asked. "Did you?" He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I plunged my fist into his chest, the sickening sound of bone and flesh breaking, echoing through the clearing. He crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The forest filled with screams as I hunted the others, their terror like a beacon in the darkness. One by one I silenced them, their cries fading into the stillness of the night. Only the bearded one remained. I found him near the edge of a rocky outcrop, his back pressed against the jagged stone. His dagger trembled in his hands as he raised it feebly. I could see him and hear his heart pounding from afar. "Please," he gasped. "Have mercy." I grabbed him by the throat and lifted him effortlessly, his feet dangling above the ground. "Did you show her mercy?" I whispered, bringing him closer. He dangled in my grip, his feet kicking uselessly against the air. Tears streamed down his face as he choked out his plea, his voice a trembling whisper. "No, please. I'm sorry." I pulled him closer, his face inches from mine. "Sorry?" I said, my voice low and deliberate. "I am not the one you hang from a tree, am I?" He whimpered, his breath hitching, unable to answer. "Tell that to her corpse," I said, releasing my grip. I watched him fall, his body tumbling into the void below, the wind carrying his screams until they vanished into silence. The forest stretched out beneath me, small and insignificant from the height I had reached. I hovered there, the cold air rushing around me, and for a moment, I felt nothing. The ringing had returned. It was something that had haunted me since my teens, a sound that came and went without warning. I had learned to live with it, brushing off the sharp, fleeting bursts. But now, months into my wandering, it came back with a vengeance, a piercing tone that clawed at my skull, growing louder and more insistent with every step. It wasn't just a sound. It was a clawing presence in my mind, scraping at my thoughts, dragging me forward. My body felt heavy, my breaths shallow, yet I couldn't stop. Each step toward the grove felt like a step into something inevitable. The trees thinned, revealing a grove overrun with weeds and brambles. At its center, half buried beneath the earth, was something alien, metallic, smooth, wrong. I knelt beside it, my fingers trembling as I brushed away the dirt and vines. Its surface was impossibly smooth, the metallic sheen rippling like liquid beneath my touch. The years had dulled its brilliance, but it still hummed faintly with life. The moment my fingers touched it, the ringing stopped. The hatch hissed, releasing a puff of stale air. I hesitated, staring into the darkness within before stepping inside. The interior was cramped, just enough space for a child to lie down. Smooth panels lined the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. At its center was a single console, its surface marred by scratches and wear. My hand moved toward it on instinct, and when my fingers brushed the surface, the screen flickered to life. A figure appeared, a man dressed in ornate armor, his face sharp and regal. His gaze felt like it could pierce through time, meeting mine directly. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. "Hello, my son," he said. The words hit me like a hammer. "If you're seeing this, then you've survived, and for that, I am proud." My chest tightened. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. "I did what I had to do," he continued, his voice steady, the weight of it filling the tiny space. "My enemies sought to destroy me, to end our bloodline. They conspired against me, against your mother, against you. I couldn't let that happen." His jaw tightened. The mask of resolve cracked slightly, revealing a flicker of something raw beneath it. "I had to make sacrifices," he admitted, his voice softer now, wavering. "Your mother, she never forgave me. But I did this for you, for us, to ensure our bloodline would endure. I hope one day you'll understand." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as his words echoed in the small space. Bloodline, survival, legacy. He spoke of me like a tool, a piece on a chessboard in a game I never agreed to play. But then I thought of her, the woman who raised me, the one who loved me, not as an heir or a legacy, but as her son. Her warmth, her humanity, had made me who I was, and the more I thought of her, the more I hated him. "I sent you to the stars," he said, his voice softening, almost wistful. "To preserve our legacy, to remind the universe of who we are." His gaze shifted, pride giving way to something deeper, something broken. I am sorry, my son, that it had to be this way. I hope you can forgive me. Your name is... The screen flickered violently, the image distorting into static. And then, abruptly, it went dark. I stared at the blank console, my reflection fractured across its surface. The silence pressed in, heavier than his words. For the first time, I had seen their faces. My father's cold resolve, my mother's sorrow. I didn't know which was worse. Hello, my son. The words lingered, haunting and hollow. Not a greeting, but a scar. He had sent me away, not out of love, but necessity. I stepped outside. The air was cool. The forest bathed in the soft light of dusk. The world around me felt smaller now, as if the trees and sky themselves recoiled, unable to contain what was inside me. I stared at the horizon, at the fading colors of the day, and then I let go. I leapt into the air, the ground cracking beneath my feet as I launched upward. The wind screamed in my ears as I climbed higher, faster, the forest shrinking into a patchwork of green and brown. The clouds parted like a veil, and for the first time, I looked down on the world I once called home. The curve of the earth stretched out before me, impossibly vast yet heartbreakingly small. I hovered there, suspended between the world below and the infinite void above. The stars blazed around me, cold and unfeeling, a million silent witnesses to my existence. And for the first time, I felt it, the weight of who I was. I wasn't just the child he sent away. I wasn't just the boy who buried his mother. I wasn't just a man who survived. I was something else. I closed my eyes, the realization settling over me like a second skin. When I opened them, I whispered into the void. I am more than you could ever imagine. Then, as the stars stretched endlessly before me, I whispered once more, my voice cold and unyielding. And one day I will find my father's world. One day.